I used to believe that once you found stability in marriage, you could rest easy, knowing love would carry you through the years. But I learned, painfully, that stability can disguise distance, and love can quietly fade into something hollow. My name isn't important, but my story is because it speaks to what happens when loneliness becomes louder than reason. I had been married to Daniel for nearly a decade. On the surface, we looked like a perfectly composed family, steady jobs, respectable home, and a rhythm that gave the impression of contentment. Yet, beneath the surface, the cracks in our relationship had widened with time. Daniel had grown increasingly absorbed in his career, often staying late at the office, returning home drained and impatient. Conversations that once sparked with energy dwindled into dry exchanges about bills, schedules, or household chores. What I missed most wasn't the grand gestures of romance, but the simple acknowledgement of being seen. A glance across the table, a word of encouragement, or even the comfort of being asked, "How was your day?" Daniel no longer seemed to notice me at all. In that silence, I felt like I had disappeared. It was during this fragile period that Alex, my stepson, returned to live with us. He was in his early 20s, Daniel's son from his first marriage, and had been away for school. His arrival was casual, explained as temporary until he figured out his next steps. I didn't think much of it at first, but from the moment he walked back into the house, his presence carried an energy I hadn't felt in a long time, warm, attentive, and quietly observant. Alex wasn't loud or overbearing. He simply had a way of noticing things. He'd ask if I wanted help with dinner, or comment that I looked tired and should take a break. He'd laugh at jokes I didn't even realize I had made, and for the first time in months, I felt like someone actually heard me. It was nothing inappropriate, at least not yet, but the shift in how I felt was undeniable. In the evenings when Daniel was still at work, Alex and I would find ourselves in the kitchen, talking about his classes, his frustrations with career uncertainty, or his memories from childhood. He spoke with openness, a quality that had long vanished from my marriage. I found myself leaning into those conversations more than I should have, lingering in them as if they were oxygen. I knew, deep down, that allowing myself to depend on his attention was dangerous. He was my husband's son, and I was supposed to be a steady figure in his life. But the loneliness inside me blurred those boundaries in ways I couldn't fully admit to myself. Still, the story didn't unravel in one dramatic moment. It began quietly, through glances, conversations, and the kind of attention I had been starting for. Looking back, I can see that the first spark had already been lit. And once a spark ignites in the dark, it rarely stays contained for long. The days that followed seemed ordinary to everyone else, but to me, they carried a subtle shift. Alex's presence filled the empty spaces Daniel had long ignored. It began innocently, almost invisibly, small gestures that seem harmless on the surface. He'd pour me a cup of coffee before I even asked or step in to finish a chore without complaint. Those little moments of consideration, so absent in my marriage, began to take root in my heart. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, that I was simply grateful for the help. But the truth was, each act of kindness chipped away at the barrier I had so carefully built around my loneliness. Every evening spent in conversation, every laugh shared across the kitchen counter, drew us closer in ways I couldn't deny. Daniel, meanwhile, became even more detached. He worked later hours, and when he was home, he carried his fatigue like armor, shielding himself from even the simplest exchange. He never asked what I had been doing, nor did he seem to notice that Alex and I had carved out a quiet companionship of our own. His absence made the contrast all the more glaring. One evening stands out as the turning point. The rain had been falling steadily all day, and Daniel had called to say he wouldn't be home until late. I had made dinner anyway, more out of habit than hope, and Alex joined me at the table. The conversation started lightly, but soon shifted into deeper territory. He spoke about feeling overlooked by his father, how he had always struggled to earn his approval. There was a vulnerability in his voice that mirrored my own hidden ache. I listened, and in that moment it felt as though we were two abandoned souls, both yearning for the same thing, recognition. The room felt smaller, the rain louder, as if the world outside had vanished, leaving only us. His eyes met mine with an intensity that startled me. It was not the look of a boy to his stepmother. It was the gaze of someone who saw me fully and without pretense. I should have pulled away. I should have reminded myself of the lines that existed, the boundaries that could never be crossed. But instead, I let the silence linger, let the warmth of his closeness wash over the emptiness inside me. It wasn't dramatic, not like in the stories people whisper about. It was quiet, tentative, and yet it carried the weight of betrayal all the same. When the moment ended, guilt settled over me like a heavy cloak. I told myself it was a mistake, that it would never happen again. But even as I tried to bury the memory, I knew I was lying. Something had shifted between us, something that couldn't be undone. And deep down, I understood the most dangerous truth of all. Once the line is crossed, going back is never as simple as you hope. I had promised myself it would never happen again. That vow echoed in my mind for days, perhaps even weeks, as I carried the weight of guilt in silence. But promises made in the heat of regret rarely survive the pull of temptation. And when Alex's gaze lingered a second too long, when his voice carried that same quiet tenderness, I felt the fragile walls of my resolve crumble. It didn't happen in one grand collapse, but through small, deliberate steps. A hand brushing against mine in the kitchen, a conversation that stretched late into the night, a moment of laughter that turned into something unspoken yet undeniable. Each time, I told myself I was strong enough to stop, and each time, I proved myself wrong. Daniel remained oblivious. His distance, which once caused me so much pain, now became the shield that hid the truth. He was either too distracted or too indifferent to notice the way Alex and I gravitated toward each other. If he did, he never asked questions. That silence became its own betrayal, his against me, mine against him. What troubled me most wasn't only the secrecy, but the change I saw in Alex. He was no longer simply offering companionship. He was investing pieces of himself, speaking words laced with a deeper affection. He began to look at me not as his father's wife, but as someone he wanted to claim as his own. The thought terrified me, because it mirrored a fear inside myself, that my loneliness had evolved into something I couldn't easily walk away from. The weight of our actions grew heavier with every repetition. After each encounter, I felt torn in two, one part desperate to preserve my family, the other unwilling to let go of the rare warmth Alex gave me. I became restless, always looking over my shoulder, certain that someone would see through the fragile mask I wore. At night, when Daniel lay asleep beside me, I would stare at the ceiling and wonder how long I could keep pretending. There were close calls, moments when footsteps in the hallway or the unexpected sound of a door made my heart race. Alex, too, began to show signs of recklessness. He grew bolder in his words, less cautious with his gestures. What had once been hidden behind careful restraint now threatened to expose itself in the light. And yet, despite the fear, despite the gnawing guilt, I couldn't bring myself to sever the tie. It had become more than comfort. It had become an addiction. Each time I thought I could walk away, I found myself pulled back in like a moth circling a flame it knows will destroy it. The cycle was dangerous, unsustainable, and bound to collapse. Deep down, I knew that betrayal doesn't remain secret forever. It surfaces, tearing apart everything in its path. And though I wanted to believe I still had control, the truth was simple: I had already lost it. Every secret carries a weight, and ours had grown unbearable. The house that once felt like a sanctuary now echoed with tension, every sound amplified by suspicion and fear. I had begun to notice Daniel watching me differently, not directly accusing, but observing with a quiet unease, as if some unspoken truth hovered just beyond his reach. His silence, once a shield, now felt like a warning. Alex sensed it too. He became restless, pacing through conversations with an urgency that betrayed his calm exterior. One evening, he confessed what I had been afraid to hear. I can't keep pretending, he said softly, his voice heavy with both defiance and longing. I don't want to hide anymore. His words struck me like a storm. They weren't just admissions of affection, they were demands for a future I could never give him. That moment forced me to see the truth I had been avoiding. What began as comfort had spiraled into something dangerous, not only for me, but for him as well. I was caught between two worlds, the fragile remnants of my marriage and the reckless passion that threatened to consume it. Neither path promised peace, only loss. The breaking point came one night, when Daniel arrived home earlier than expected. He walked into the living room to find Alex and me seated close together, our conversation hushed, but unmistakably intimate. Nothing incriminating had been said, yet the look in Daniel's eyes told me he had seen enough. He didn't shout, didn't accuse. His silence was far worse. It was the silence of betrayal recognized, the kind that cuts deeper than any word could. After that night, everything unraveled quickly. Daniel withdrew entirely, retreating into himself, while Alex avoided his father altogether. The house became divided, each of us trapped in our separate corners, suffocating under the weight of what we had done. I had destroyed not only my marriage, but the fragile trust between father and son. The guilt was unbearable, and yet so was the emptiness that followed when Alex finally decided to leave. He packed quietly, without confrontation, and the sound of the door closing behind him was the sharpest reminder of what I had lost. It wasn't just him or Daniel. It was the version of myself I could no longer claim, the woman who once believed she could keep her promises. Looking back, I understand now that betrayal doesn't simply break relationships, it reshapes lives. It creates wounds that linger even after the people are gone. I thought I was filling a void in my heart, but all I managed to do was carve it deeper, leaving scars on everyone involved. If there's anything my story teaches, it's this. Loneliness is dangerous, but deception is deadly. The warmth of stolen affection may feel like salvation in the moment, but its aftermath burns colder than the loneliness that began it all.